Okay, so this is just a bit of a tip on speeding up your Elementor editor and in some cases the front end as well. When you've got too many plugins or too many options in those plugins available. And what happens is, like, if I do a Control F5 here, I'm going to see my Elementor logo come up. Within a short space of time, my editor's there, and the left-hand side with all the elements comes up. A very, very common thing I see in the Facebook communities is a complaint that it takes a long time for this editor to come up, takes even longer for these elements to come up on the side here, and sometimes they don't come up at all. Now, when they don't come at all, that could be because your server settings are too low, so your PHP memory or your server spec is just far too low for it. But it could also be because you've got way too many plugins and way too many options in those plugins enabled. So what I've done is I've actually just focused on the Crockoblock products. I want to show you through what I found and what we can do to make this work better. So at the moment, I've got all of the plugins disabled, I think. I have. So all of my Crockoblock plugins, actually I haven't got Jet Elements disabled, so I'm just going to deactivate that. All of my Crockoblock update installation, I've got all of the stuff there disabled. Now I've got a chart here I've made up which shows you why I'm getting that line around there. Okay, so what I've done is that with all Crockoblock disabled, on the front end, when I do a network check, I get 88 requests. It takes 1.2 seconds for that front end to load. The back end, so the editor, this editor here, there's 238 requests, which takes 2.73 seconds to load. So that's my benchmark on my current hosting and my current internet connection. So what I then did is I went into Crockoblock here and I enabled every single one of these plugins with their defaults. I do have to say here, I did have to disable JetBlog because with the current version of Elementor, it was generating a PHP error, so I'm not sure what that is. But everything apart from JetBlog, I ended up enabled. And this is the results I got. So on the front end, I got 133 requests, which took 2.24 seconds. So that's a whole second more than with them all disabled. And that's without adding any widgets whatsoever to the page. So this is just by having them enabled. Now, the back end, we went from 238 requests to 453 requests. It took 4.2 seconds, so another 2 seconds to load. That's quite significant, particularly if your server resources are low. It could be even worse than that. So just simply enabling all of your plugins and then leaving them on their defaults, it just does not make sense. So I then went down to just enabling Jet Engine. So that's going in here and just getting a Jet Engine. Where's my Jet Engine? We're in here. Where are we? Jet Engine. Actually, Jet Engine is enabled. So just by enabling Jet Engine, I then looked at these results and I went from on my front end, which did 88 requests up the top here, which is our benchmark, down to 89 requests. So only one extra request on the front end. That's not too bad at all. My load time was pretty much the same. This is going to vary anyway, but that's, in my view, it made no difference. The back end, we had 258 requests, which is our benchmark up here. So pretty similar again. So just enabling Jet Engine had no negative impact on my performance. So I then went down and thought, okay, I'm going to enable Jet Engine and Jet Elements and enable all of the widgets. Now my front end went to 93 requests from 88, so it jumped by what, five requests. Again, this is without adding any elements to the page. So this is just extra JavaScript or CSS that it's loading just to be prepared. but it hasn't actually added anything to the editor. So it's not too bad, just a few extra requests. So 93 requests. The back end went to 328 requests. So going back up here, our benchmark was 238 requests with 2.73 second load. With Jet Engine and Jet Elements, we went from 238 to 328. So here we go. Again, 238 to 328. Okay, so almost 100 more requests. And it took 3 seconds for that page editor to load. That's with Jet Elements added to that. So then we've gone in and thought, okay, what if we go and actually modify how many widgets are enabled? So if I went into the Jet plugin settings, yeah, I've got to re-enable that, sorry. If I enable my Jet Elements, and I go into my plugin settings, and for Jet Elements, I go just to the widgets. I've got everything enabled, so everything's checked. So with everything checked, this is the result that I got. So 93 requests on the front end, 328 on the back end. Okay, now what I did is I just disabled everything in the second and third rows. So I've actually only got 13 widgets enabled now on the left-hand side here. So I then did a request here. So that was with everything enabled. So 93 on the front end, 230 on the back end. I enabled only the first 13 widgets. Front end didn't change. Again, I haven't added any content to the editor. So when you add some of these elements to the editor, that might include some extra CSS and JavaScript, which is okay because it's needed for those elements. But I've dropped from 328 requests down to 286 requests just by disabling the elements that I'm not likely to use. So I've gone down from a 3 second editor load, the backend editor, to a 2.6 second. Now, again, this is going to vary depending on set variability, but that's a significant difference in the number of requests that it's doing. So that's all the JavaScripts and the CSS, etc., that it's actually loading in the back end. That's a significant difference. That makes it an enormous difference. So a mistake would be to go in and enable all of your Crockoblock widgets and enable all of your extensions. So what I typically do is I've got a starter site, and on my starter site, I've gone through and I've disabled every single option that we've got for each of the Crockoblock plugins. So I go in and I add those Crockoblock plugins to my starter site. I go through and I disable all of the widgets. I then disable the plugins. So then I've got a base starting point. So when I clone that site, if I want to use something in Jet Elements, I enable Jet Elements, and then I go in and enable the actual widgets that I want. Now, the reason I do it that way is because if you start clean, so you want to get as close to this result up the top here with not having it enabled, you want to get as clean start. You're better off to only enable the plugins that you want and only enable the features. So the widgets and the extensions, only enable those features that you're actually going to use. Now, the reason I say that is because if you enable features as you need them, it's very, very easy to know that the stuff that is enabled is stuff that you've used on your site. Now, you might change some things and then delete some things off your site, which then change that, but it doesn't really matter. If you go the other way and you enable everything, use it, and then later on, when you want to optimize, you go back and you say, okay, I'm going to disable all the stuff that I haven't used. You now have to remember every single widget you've used on every single page. Otherwise, you might disable something that's in use on a page that you've forgotten about. So my view is you're better off to start clean and then add as you need it, rather than start with everything and then remove the stuff that you don't need at the end. It's just easier. How do I do that? I use in the Crockoblock case, I use their features page, And let's say I wanted a text ticker. So I'm going to go Control F to find. I'm going to put ticker. And I've got two that it's found, both on the same block. So I've got a text ticker, which is part of my Jet blog. Okay. Say I want to have an audio player. So get an audio player, whoops, part of file uploads. So that's part of Jet Form Builder. That's not what I want. The next, I've got an audio player here, which is part of Jet Elements. So I would then go back into my backend. I would go into my plugin settings, the Jet Elements, widgets and extensions, find my audio player and enable it. Now it will be available if I go back to here and do a F5. Now under the Jet Elements, I've got an audio player. But I don't have every single element that I could use, which is going to clog down my editor. It's going to make it harder to edit because it just gets slower and slower the more things that you add. I only put there what I'm going to use, and then I can drag that onto the page as I need it. So that's my tip for keeping it clean, only adding what you want. Now, the other plugin I use a lot is Dynamicooo. Same deal with that. If I go to Dynamicooo, when you first install Dynamicooo, pretty much all of these widgets are enabled. So the red on there means it's not enabled, and the green means it is enabled. So what I generally do with my starter site, I go through and I deactivate all the widgets. I go into the extensions, deactivate all the extensions. Dynamic tags, pretty much don't use most of these, so deactivate them all. Page settings, so I might use the page scroll, might not. Global settings, I don't use that, so I could actually deactivate now. Save that. Now what I would then do is go over to, I'm just going to bring up another page here because I forgot to bring one up. Bring it up in Firefox so I can stick it on top here. Go to Dynamicooo. And this side is a little slow, so bear with us on this. Oh, it's actually quicker today. So if we go into Dynamicoo's features, we can go by category. Let's say we want to look at their forms. Where it gets slow. Okay, and in the forms, still thinking. Okay, so I want some conditional logic, or I want to add, say, a signature. So I know that in Dynamicooo in the forms, I've got a signature block that I can add. So this is in there. So if I go, or I want to add stripe, so I'm going to add the signature block and stripe. Heading back over to my plugins, I would go to my widgets, try and search for there, Control F, signature. Not in there. Okay, that must be an extension. Go in the extensions, Control F, SIG. There it is there, signature stripe. Where are we? Signature. So I just click on this to enable it. See the stripe there, click on that to enable it. I'm only enabling what I actually need. If I enable every single one of these, it's going to end up adding to all these queries here. So instead of getting 453 requests, I could end up with 500, 600, 700 requests in the editor, which is just going to make it extremely slow. If you've got low spec hosting, it probably isn't even going to work. So the tip is start lean, disable everything that you don't need, and then only enable the stuff that you do. Now, one final tip is as a cleanup, is when you've finished doing all this, I would always go back to my plugins. This is just a dev site, so it doesn't really matter. I'd go back to my plugins on a live site, and anything that is not active, I would tick, go through, tick everything that I'm not using, go through, bulk actions, and delete the plugin. Keep your plugins clean. That keeps it more secure. You don't have to worry about backups, or sorry, not backup. You don't have to worry about updates for plugins that you're not using. So only enable what you want and clean up at the end by removing everything you didn't use. Okay, so that's my tip for keeping it nice and quick and clean. So hopefully that's useful and is going to help you with keeping your sites working well.